Hello guys, in the previous video we had created the AWS Lambda function which we are going to be working on with the GET request. In this particular video we are going to be creating the API gateway API which will be triggering our AWS Lambda function and fetching the requested data. So for this all I have to do is I need to go to the AWS API gateway service on the web page, and I need to go ahead and create a REST API. I need to build a REST API for this thing. I'll click OK. Okay, so this is an example API which they have already provided with the list of pets and everything. It is a general example, but we are not going to go ahead with this. We are going to be creating a new API, and for this API I am going to be giving the name, let's say, test API. And there is nothing much to give over here. If you want, you can create a description over here for, let's say, a sample project, or let's say different API. Anything is fine. Hit on create API. It will come over here, and this is the particular area wherein we'll be creating our resources, we'll be creating our methods, and so on and so forth. So right now we are seeing slash as the root folder for it. So any particular API which we are getting, it is not having any methods, or it does not have any directory based mapping. So what we are going to be doing first here is we are going to be creating a resource is nothing but, let's say you have a domain or a website, let's say www.example.com, and you want to visit a particular account, let's say www.example.com/chirag. So for /chirag in terms of API gateway will be a resource, and any data under /chirag, if you want to fetch, you are going to be accessing that data using methods which can be put, post, head, delete, get, all these other resources, all these other methods under the resource. So the next step is going to be creating first a resource, create resource, and I can give any name. Let's say I'll give Chirag. The resource path, as you can see, it will be Chirag over here. I'll hit create resources, and it will create a resource for /Chirag. Okay, so now the /resource Chirag has been created. Now we can create multiple methods under this particular resource. So here I can do create method, and I can select any method. Let's say there is a list of methods as a delete, get, head, options, patch, post, put. So I can create any, I'm giving any method, I'm going to create a particular resource about it. As soon as I hit this particular any resource, I'm being asked for what is the integration type going to be. Integration type as in where is it this particular API going to get the data from, which means if the API is created and the user hits on this particular API, where the request should go in order to get the response. So here also there is a particular 5 particular options given: Lambda, HTTP, mock, AWS service, or a VPC link, AWS function, or a HTTP web server. It can fetch data from anywhere. So I'll keep the default selection over here as Lambda function, because that is where the API gateway will be getting the data from. The second thing which we need to mention over here is the Lambda region where the Lambda function is located, and the Lambda function, the name of the Lambda function. So let me just type test, and it will automatically fetch the function which is already defined in that particular region. If there are more than one particular Lambda function is defined, then it will give you a list of it, and you can choose from that particular list which Lambda function you want to mention over here in this API gateway. For this particular example, I'm going to be using the one which we created in the previous video, and I'm going to hit save. So here it is. So now what it shows over here is how the data will be encountered, how the data will be processed, where the data will go, how the data will come back to API gateway and will be sent to client. So here is client as in you, who is trying to access that particular URL, and it will send the data over method request, which will then be forwarded to AWS Lambda in the form of integration request. This integration request will then reach AWS Lambda Python function in the form of events, which we just checked over here. If you haven't checked, these are the events. These are the particular events. Since we are not triggering AWS Lambda function from this particular point, from this particular web page, we need to assign these events over here in the form of put function. Okay, we'll come to that later. So as soon as the flow of execution comes over Lambda function, it executes the Python function over there and sends the request over integrated response back to the method response, wherein the response, whatever it has gotten from the Python function, will be displayed on the client interface. So this is a small cycle which the entire flow of execution takes as soon as the API gateway has been accessed on the client. So since we are over here, let's try and test out our particular API so that we can be sure that it works fine and the flow of execution is hitting our Lambda function. So here it is. Since we are going to be providing data directly using put function, we need to specify the body type over here. So how we are going to be doing is, we are going to be mentioning using curly braces profession, which we have defined it as doc over here, and it knows where it needs to go since we have defined the backend as AWS Lambda function, and just try and test it out. What is the answer? Yes. So as you can see, the response body is 24 doc physiotherapist, which will be the answer since we are accessing this second element of this particular dictionary called employees in this particular function called get form. So that is the reason why this is accessing 24 doc and physiotherapist. Let me change this particular entry to, let's say, Chirag. Okay. So if we are going to be doing that, we need to also make changes over here, and we need to mention it as ENGG because Chirag's profession is an engineer, and make changes over here as well. ENGG. Save. Okay, it is saved. Let me test it out. Yeah, so it is now printing out 28 ENGG DevOps. Now we need to also test out the API gateway. For this, I need to make the changes in the request body, and I'll change the event data to profession as ENGG. Let's test it out, and yeah, see, it is giving the response as 28 ENGG DevOps. So this is the required answer which we are getting. Now, what all things we have done in this particular video is, we have created an API gateway, we created a resource, and then we created the method under that particular resource. Now the last thing which is pending to do is to deploy this particular API and check the output if it is correct or not. Okay, so for that, what we are going to do is, we'll click on actions, we'll go to deploy API, and here it will ask for the stage. If there are no stages on your particular API on your AWS account, it will say new stage, and as soon as you click on new stage, it will ask for some details such as stage name, stage description, and deploy description. Now out of these three options, stage name is the only mandatory option, so I'll just go ahead and give it a sample stage name as test. Okay, and I'll give this thing as also test description. It is unnecessary and not relevant to us at the moment, so I'll just give any abstract value. Deploy. Okay, so as soon as we hit deploy, it will give you a particular invoke URL like this. Okay, now if you try to access it over interview, you might be facing issues, but for this particular URL, or the usage of this particular URL is going to be on the CLI basis, or in the way wherein you can access it using curl calls. So I'll show you how we can do this, but for this I'll have to switch to terminal over here, and over here I'm going to import Python library requests, and I'll have to give you this particular URL. I'll have to access this particular URL. This is the old URL, so let me replace it with the new one. Here you go. Now this particular URL won't give you the satisfied answer or the expected answer. Let me just run it once and show it to you. ENGG. So here you go. See, it is showing missing authentication token over here because we have not specified the method. My bad. We have not specified the resource. Here is the entire API URL. Here is the stage test. Here is the stage test, but we haven't specified the resource which we are accessing. Okay, so what we are going to be doing now is I'll give in the path /Chirag, which is the resource, and we'll be getting the answer 28 ENGG DevOps, which we have expected from this particular exercise. So guys, this is how the entire execution works, flow of execution works. We need to provide the URL over here, but we need to add one more thing to this particular URL, which is the resource, which is Chirag, which we have created over here, this guy. Okay, so just keep in mind that this small thing you need to add, or else you will be keep on running into missing authentication token error again and again. So this is how you create get put function, which will help you get data from your AWS Lambda and trigger it. Now, since we have triggered Lambda function once, let me just trigger it a couple of times more so that we can check the CloudWatch graphs for any invocations. Yeah. So this is how many times we have invoked it, like around 3-5 times. Previously also I had accessed it, so that's why it is showing metrics like this. This is the amount of duration it took, 20 milliseconds. The count, number of times it was successful, number of times it was not successful, everything is listed over here. So success rate is about 100%, errors are 0. So it has executed 100 times, 100% of the times, and hence we are now able to access the URL successfully. If I check the contents, yes, it is able to access. If I check the status code, again it will show 200, which means the request has been successful. So this is how you create a get put function in order to invoke the Lambda function via your AWS API gateway URL. Thank you.